Welcome to FFBC Online. Thank you for joining us today. Please remember this coming Friday is Good Friday, so join us at 9 a.m. for that service, and also this coming Sunday at 9:30 a.m. for our Easter service. Also, please remember to check out each Sunday night at 6 p.m. our Ember service. We'd love to have you there. Coming up, we have Jesus the Game Changer starting on May 4th. Please register online so that you can join with us in that and be part of a Zoom group, a discussion group to go over what you're learning each week. Some ways you can get connected and stay connected with us during this time is through our Facebook page, also our website, and also please remember just to call each other during the week, send text messages and see how each other's going. You can set up Zoom meetings, which some of us have been doing already, through meeting together or doing prayer together, and that's a great way to stay connected at this time. Also, if you'd like to give to support the ministry we do, we've set it up to where you can give online now. Just check out our website so that you can support the work that we're doing. That'd be great. Lastly, please feel free to chat online during the service, as some of you are probably doing right now. And you can also ask for prayer during the service and someone will be praying for you. In fact, let me just do that right now. Father, we just thank you that in this crazy time of life with COVID-19, we can actually still meet together and be part of a community together. We ask that you would give wisdom to all the officials that are out there making decisions. And God, just please bless all the responders and medical staff and give them wisdom as they're making decisions. And God, please keep us safe. Please keep our world safe. We just ask for an end to this suffering and that you'd bring heaven here on earth. And we just thank you that you haven't abandoned us and that you love us so much. And we just look forward to worshiping you now in Jesus' name. Amen.
It's April 17, 1975. The Khmer Rouge have just seized power. With AK-47s in hand, they burst into towns and villages and forcibly remove people and send them on the long march to the killing fields. In the next 1,364 days, 2 million of the 8 million population of Cambodia will be dead. Some killed, some dying of starvation, others are simply worked to death. The more unfortunate ones go to S-21. S-21 is the execution, torture, interrogation centre for the Khmer Rouge. It's presided over by Comrade Duke. Comrade Duke, when you arrive, would decide whether you'll be executed, whether you would be sorted out for interrogation, or whether you'll be experimented upon. He kept meticulous records of what he had done, and what he and his team did was brutal. They would torture people through electrocuting them. They would whip them with electric cords. Sometimes they would suffocate them with plastic bags put over their heads. When they had to kill someone, in order to save bullets, they would simply cut throats. They would cave heads in with shovels. They would break necks with hose. For babies they wanted to get rid of, they would drop them from balconies or smash them into trees. And all this was overseen by Comrade Duke. 20 years later, a pastor by the name of Christopher Lapel makes his way to Cambodia. He's living and working in the States, but he was from Cambodia. He's gone back to his homeland. He wants to invest in the people. He wants to invest in the communities. He's actually teaching a class on leadership to Christian leaders and Christians. As he teaches, he remembers what it was like 20 years ago under the reign of the Khmer Rouge. He remembers losing his family and his friends, and particularly his sister, who'd been sent to the infamous S-21. As he teaches, the usual crowd sort of gathers, and there's a young guy. He's scrawny. He's from a Thai village. His ears sort of stick out a little bit. He's depressed. He's not a Christian. He's not someone that would normally come to these classes, but on the invitation of a friend, he's gone. After Lapel has taught his class, he does what he usually does. He issues an invitation for anybody that wants forgiveness, for anybody that wants to know Jesus. He gives them the opportunity, and this guy steps forward. His name is Hang Pin. His life is utterly changed because of what Lapel tells him. He goes back to his village a different man. He goes back to his village. He plants a church. He gets involved in humanitarian work and works in the village in Thailand for refugees. It's a great story. Then it's April 1999. Lapel gets a phone call from a reporter from the Associated Press. And they ask him, do you know Hang Pin? He describes him. He says, yes, I know him well. And they talk about this man and his reputation for being humanitarian. And then the reporter drops in, do you know? He used to be Khmer Rouge. Did you know that he used to work at S-21? Hang Pin is Comrade Duke. The man who oversaw, the man who presided the death of his sister is this man. What do you do with that? How do you process something like that? I mean, this man has done terrible and despicable things, and yet now this man is forgiven. This man is right with God. This man gets to spend eternity with God. What do you do with something like that? I mean, that's not how things are supposed to work, are they? If you do the crime, you pay the time. Bad things are meant to happen to bad people. Men like this aren't supposed to get away with it, and certainly if they get away with it, they certainly shouldn't be let off in any particular way. So what do you do with this? This thing called grace. Comrade Duke doesn't deserve grace. You wouldn't think so, would you? I mean, is there a Comrade Duke in your life? Or is there someone that you think has done something that's terrible and despicable and they don't deserve grace? And you find it really, really disturbing at the thought that this person might be forgiven. If you ask the Israelites thousands of years ago who their Comrade Duke was, there's probably one name that would come to mind. It's one of their kings. It's a guy by the name of Manasseh. Manasseh's story is told in 2 Kings 21. It's also told in 2 Chronicles 33. He was a vile man, a despicable man. He did terrible things. He took Israel to really, really dark places. If anybody was considered to be evil, it was this man. Listen to his story. It's recorded in, as I said, in 2 Kings 21 and 2 Chronicles 33. This is a man that shouldn't be entitled to redemption or salvation or forgiveness of any sort. His story starts off fairly simply. It's in verses 1 and 2 of 2 Chronicles 33. It says, Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 55 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. So the story starts like every story seems to start, and whether it's Chronicles or Kings, we're given the age of the king or the age of the guy when he became king, and we're given the length of his reign. This guy's 12 years of age and he reigns for 55 years. It's a long tenure. And then it cuts to the chase. The question that everybody wants answered. Was he a good king or was he a bad king? Chronicles, ancient tradition tells us, was written by the prophet Jeremiah. Now, we don't know if Jeremiah really wrote it or not, but we know why this book was written. It's written at a time when Israel is finding itself in exile. They've lost the land that God gave them. Things have gone pear-shaped for them, and they're looking back and going, why? Why did this happen? Did God abandon us? Did God forgive us? Or was it something that we did? And so they're going through the list of the different kings, either whether it be in Jerusalem, Israel in the north, or Judah in the south, and saying, what happened? And they recognize it wasn't God that departed from them. It's they departed from God. And so they want to know, as they look at a king's reign, was this a good king or was this a bad king? And so we're told about this guy. He's a bad king. And if we want to know why we find ourselves in exile, they'll come to this one and go, this king, this man, more than anybody else, is the reason we find ourselves in this situation. He was a terrible king. He was a vile king. He was a despicable king. He led the people into dark places, and deliberately so. His father was a good king. It was described he was a man that was right in the eyes of God. His father was a guy by the name of Hezekiah. Hezekiah sort of got rid of different places of worship to foreign gods in Jerusalem. He consulted the scriptures. He obeyed the commands. He worshipped at the temple. He trusted God. He was a good king. He was a right king. And then along comes his son. And so his son knows the way things ought to be. And he comes along and he deliberately undoes it all. He undoes everything that his father was about. And listen to this description. It's in verses 3 to 9 of the choices that Manasseh made. We're told, he rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had demolished. He also erected altars to the Baals and made Asherah poles. He bowed down to all the starry hosts and worshipped them. He built altars in the temple of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, my name will remain in Jerusalem forever. In both courts of the temple of the Lord, he built altars to all the starry hosts. He sacrificed his children in the fire in the valley of Ben Hinnom, practiced divination and witchcraft, sought omens and consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, arousing his anger. He took the image he had made and put it in God's temple, of which God had said to David and to his son Solomon, in this temple and in Jerusalem, which I've chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. I will not again make the feet of the Israelites leave the land I assigned to your ancestors, if only they'll be careful to do everything I commanded them concerning all the laws, decrees, and regulations given through Moses. But Manasseh led Judah and the people of Jerusalem astray, so they did more evil than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. Now, it's described as evil, or he did evil. I like to say that was pretty rare, but in fact, unfortunately, that's not uncommon. If you go through the list of the kings of either Israel or Judah, what you find is more often than not, that seems to be a description. Increasingly so, as the longer they went on, they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. That's not what's surprising. That's not even shocking. That's not even unusual. It's the last line that sets Manasseh apart. Verse 9. But Manasseh led Judah and the people of Jerusalem astray, so they did more evil than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. If you're a Jew, you have this deep, deep, deep connection with the land. Even to this day, Israelites all over the world have this deep connection to the land of Israel. And they can trace their history back, and they remember exactly when this became their land, when they were promised this land. In Genesis chapter 12, we have this moment where God appears to a guy by the name of Abram, who we better know as Abraham. And he says, hey, Abram or Abraham, I want you to leave where you are, and I want you to go to a land that I will show you. And when you go there, I'll make you into a great nation. And then we get to a few chapters later, Genesis chapter 15, and he actually arrives in that land. He arrives in that place. And God establishes a relationship, a covenant with him, and he maps out how this is going to pan out. And he gives you this insight in the future, and he says, oh, by the way, the land you're in now, there'll be a season of about 400 years, which I'll take you from this land, and you go into a foreign power or foreign land, and then you'll become slaves there. And then I'll return you back to this land. Which just sort of raises the question, why didn't God just give it to Abraham then? Why did he have to wait 400 years? Well, part of the answer is that at this point, he's not a nation. It's just an old man and his wife. They weren't ready to conquer the land. They weren't ready to take the land or administer the land. They were ill-equipped to do it at this point. It's a promise of what will be. But there's something else. There's another reason why not yet. It's found in Genesis chapter 15, verse 16. It's written, in the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. What God is saying that in the future, these people living in this land, they'll become so immoral, so despicable, so depraved, they'll move so far away from what is right and what is good. There'll come a time when I cannot and will not tolerate this. There'll come a time when I will actually do something about this. But now's not yet that time. That will come in the future. And it did come in the future. And people of Israel, after Moses, we were led by Joshua into that promised land. And they took that land just as is promised that they would in Genesis chapter 15. But when the people now, they find themselves out of the land again, they're looking back and trying to figure out what had happened. But here's the sad realization that the land or the time under the reign of Manasseh, they're actually worse than those that they had replaced. And they've got to come to the conclusion, is it any wonder we lost the land? Is it any wonder we were sent into exile? Because Judah and Jerusalem was meant to be this place where the people of God would live, and they'll live in sync with God, and they would reflect the character, the qualities of God. They would model what it's like to be people walking with God and living with God. They were meant to be a people who were a light in darkness. You're meant to walk around Jerusalem and you wouldn't see paraphernalia to any other God. There'd just be the temple where people went to worship God and to honor God. You walk around, you smell the fragrance of the incense and the sacrifices happening in the temple. And yet under the reign of Manasseh, you walk around Jerusalem and it was just like every other city. You'd look to the hilltops and there'd be piles of rocks. There were altars to foreign gods. There'd be shrines to Baal, the Canaanite god, the god that was in the land, that was worshipping the land before they took the land. There'd be Asherah poles, they'd be about a meter and a half tall, and they were to a goddess called Asherah, a goddess of fertility. Again, a foreign god right there in the middle of Jerusalem. This wasn't a city that just worshipped God alone. This was a city that worshipped a bunch of different gods. They worshipped all the starry hosts and the sun and the moon. They engaged in witchcraft and sorcery. The king would engage in mediums and spiritists. In other words, he wanted to speak to the dead to try to figure out what was going on. And he even had his own sons sacrificed in the valley of Ben Hinnom. Something that Israelites back in Leviticus 20 were told, never ever sacrifice your children to gods. If anybody does it, they ought to be executed. Take them out of the community. We will not tolerate that. And yet here, in this moment we have the king that is doing this. Make no mistake, this is a vile man, this is a despicable man. The thought of him ought to evoke different emotions in you. Listen again to verse 9. We're told, but Manasseh led Judah and the people of Jerusalem astray. The idea is that he beguiled them, he seduced them. It's like he wooed them away from God and said, come on, I want you to worship these other things, these other gods. And he leads them intentionally into dark places. Quite simply, he's the worst king they had ever known. When people would hear the name Manasseh, it would evoke responses, emotions, the way that maybe the name of like a Stalin, a Pol Pot, a Hitler, Osama bin Laden, a Comrade Duke might evoke in people today. There's deep, deep hatred and emotion associated with his name, disgust. They were vile, they're despicable people. And that's what they would feel at the thought of this man. And so what happens next in the story is what ought to have happened. The Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they paid no attention. So they brought against them the army commanders of the king of Assyria, who took Manasseh prisoner, put a hook in his nose, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon. That's justice. That's getting what he deserves. That's the way it's supposed to work. The evil king is getting what he deserves. It's Hitler dying in the bunker. It's Pol Pot being in prison and dying in prison. It's Osama bin Laden hiding away in Pakistan and getting hunted down by SEAL Team 6 and shot. It's him getting his just deserves. This is how the story is supposed to end. We're meant to be watching this. The lights go up, the credits roll down. We go, great. That's a great ending to the story. The bad guy gets what's coming to him. Story over. And yet the problem is that's not how this story ends. The story has this unexpected twist to it. See, in verses 12 and 13 we're told this. In his distress he sought the favour of the Lord, his God, and humbled himself greatly before the God of his ancestors. And when he prayed to him, the Lord was moved by his entreaty and listened to his plea. So he brought him back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord is God. To which we say, what? How does that happen? That's not the way it's supposed to go. He's meant to get the justice. We don't let people like this off. It's sort of disturbing. It's disturbing when the child molester makes a deathbed confession. It's disturbing when the serial killer gives his life to Christ. It's disturbing when Manasseh turns back to God. And what's even more disturbing is that he's accepted by God. And yet that's grace. And you see, Manasseh is not someone we ought to like. He's not someone that we do like. And it raises the question, who's a Manasseh in your life? Who's a Manasseh in my life? Who's maligned you and mistreated you? Who's broken trust? Who's hurt you or hurt someone that you love? Who's crossed a line that you thought should never be crossed and you can never forgive them for what they've done? Who's the Manasseh in your life and you go, no way does this person deserve grace. No way should this person be forgiven. And yet here's the problem with this story. The problem with this story is that God forgives people like Manasseh. If we can control grace, we'll be far less liberal in giving it out. We'll be far more discerning on who's entitled to it, who deserves it, who gets it, and who doesn't. It's not the way that God deals with it, and that's what makes his story so confronting. Philip Yancey, in his book, What's So Amazing About Grace, writes this. Grace is Christianity's best gift to the world. A spiritual nova in our midst, exerting a force stronger than vengeance, stronger than racism, stronger than hate. What I love about this quote, a couple of things. One is that he's identifying that, hey, we have these inclinations, don't we? We have these pulls, we have this tension sometimes that we want to hate and we want vengeance. And we think that if they're somehow satiated, if they're somehow lived out, somehow expressed, then maybe we'll feel better and things will be better. And what he's saying is we've got these inclinations, we've got these impulses. I can appreciate that, but guess what? Grace is better. And grace is stronger. And grace does bring about the change that needs to be brought about. And when we understand that, and we understand what's happening in this story, it forces us to reconsider our choices. Because this is what the story of the Manassehs of this world do. They force us to reconsider our choices about grace and how we want to see grace administered to others. So what do we do when they repent? And not only when people repent, but they're embraced by God, when they're forgiven by God. As much as we don't extend grace to the Manassehs of this world, to the Comrade Dukes of this world, God does. If he does it for this man, then who can't he do it for? Because see, grace is not about who deserves it. It's not about who earns it. It's not about who's entitled to it. It's utterly undeserved, and perhaps that's the point. Because we tend to think that, hey, this person's deserving and this person isn't deserving. Singer-songwriter Sting once said, I think we're all capable of becoming the worst. The child molester, the thief. Not to admit it is to go mad. We must steer the middle course and say, yes, I have this potential. But I also have the opposite potential to be a St. Francis of Assisi. We have a Genghis Khan on the one side and a St. Francis on the other. And to steer a course between the two is sanity. What he's saying is, hey, if I'm going to be honest, I have a bit of Manasseh in me. I have a bit of Comrade Duke in me. And yes, I have the potential to do noble, beautiful things. I have a bit of Francis of Assisi in me, but I also have the capacity to do terrible and heinous and depraved and despicable things. And I need grace. Grace isn't just for the person over there. I need grace because we all have Manasseh in us. We all have Comrade Duke in us. We all have a Pol Pot within us. We all need grace. And none of us deserve it. None of us have earned it. None of us are entitled to it. And that's the point. All of us have done terrible, despicable things. We've thought terrible and despicable things. All of us need to know and experience grace in some way, shape or form. C.S. Lewis said to be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in me. Do you get that? That God's forgiven the inexcusable in me. Those terrible things that I've thought, those terrible things that I've done, those inclinations, those desires, those things that are quite frankly inexcusable. And he's saying when you get that, when you get what God has sort of overlooked or forgiven for you, how could you possibly limit grace to somebody else? And see, grace is not ours to limit. Grace is not ours to edit. Because God's forgiven the inexcusable in us, we need to be not just reservoirs and recipients of that grace. We need to learn to be conduits of that grace to others. And by the way, if you want to find grace, if you want to appreciate grace, if you want to know grace, you also have to recognize that you're broken. You also have to recognize there's a darkness, there's a brokenness in you that needs grace. There's the inexcusable in you, there's the inexcusable in me that needs grace. And the great danger is we don't think that we need it. Ricky Gervais, the atheist comedian, did a message a few years ago called, around about Easter times, and it was like, why am I a good Christian? And of course it's a sarcastic piece of literature, it's a sarcastic message, but right at the end he gets this point where he actually goes and makes his way through the 10 Commandments. And he says, by his estimation, he's done them all. Not broken them all, he's kept them all. And he works his way through them, goes tick, 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 I got 10 out of 10. I haven't done anything wrong. So therefore, I'm a good Christian. It seems ludicrous. I'm not actually sure that he's completely convinced by his own argument. But it's a form of denial, isn't it? It's saying that I'm actually okay. And as much as we might think that's ludicrous, we have a version of it. Our version is that, hey, I'm a good bloke. I'm a good guy. I'm a good person. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, but I'm better than the average person. I'm better than a Pol Pot. I'm better than Stalin. I'm better than Hitler. I'm no Osama bin Laden. Right? In the scheme of things, in the sweep of humanity, I reckon I'm on the good side, so I reckon I'm okay. And the challenge or the great danger of that sort of thinking is that when I think that way, when I think the way of Ricky Gervais, then I think, I don't think that I need forgiveness. I don't think that I need God. I don't think I need grace. I think I've done enough. Brendan Manning in the Ragamuffin Gospel writes, "To live by grace means to acknowledge my whole life story, the light side and the dark side. In admitting my shadow side, I learn who I am and what God's grace means to me." Do you hear what he's saying? Unless I admit that I'm not okay, unless I admit that I'm broken, unless I admit there is a dark side in me, then I'm not okay. Unless I'm courageous enough to do that, I'll never know, I'll never appreciate grace, I'll never thirst for grace. What makes a Manasseh story a story of grace is that this man, for all his faults, comes to the point in his life where he recognizes that I have a dark side. I have a dark life. I've made mistakes. And he humbles himself before God. Listen again to verses 12 and 13. In his distress, he sought the favor of the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his ancestors. And when he prayed to them, the Lord was moved by his entreaty and listened to his plea. So he brought him back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord is God. This is a very different story. If he says, hey, I don't need anything, I haven't done anything wrong, I don't deserve any punishment, this was unfair. It's a very different story. If he doesn't recognize that he has a dark side, if he has a dark life, he doesn't humble himself, it's a very different story. But because he does, it's a story of grace. And he comes to God and he repents and he humbles himself. And what does he do? He receives grace. And if someone like Manasseh can receive grace, then it forces all of us to reconsider our notions about grace and how this thing works. It forces us to deal with it. Let me finish with one more Philip Yancey quote. Again, from What's So Amazing About Grace. He writes, because grace is unusual. Grace is not something that we're used to experiencing often in our culture. Maybe you hear it talked about. Maybe if you've been around the church or Sunday school, you've got a whole box of dice, you would have heard about grace at some point. But it's not something that's normally expressed or lived out or even pursued wholeheartedly across our culture. And Yancey writes these words. From the nursery school onward, we are taught how to succeed in the world of ungrace. The early bird gets a worm, no pain, no gain. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Demand your rights, get what you pay for. I like to win, I insist on my rights. I want people to get what they deserve, nothing more, nothing less. Yet, if I listen, I hear a loud whisper from the gospel that I did not get what I deserved. I deserved punishment and got forgiveness. I deserved wrath and got love. I deserved a debtor's prison and got instead a clean credit history. I deserved stern lectures and crawl on your knees repentance. I got a banquet, Babette's feast spread for me. Grace means nobody gets what they deserve. And because of that, it creates room for transformation. Grace creates room for people to truly change. Because of grace, a Manasseh becomes a God-fearer at the end of his life. Because of grace, Comrade Duke becomes a humanitarian. because of grace, you and me, no matter what our past, no matter what our shame, no matter what our history, no matter what choices we've made, he's saying you don't have to be defined by those. I can define you differently. You can have a different course for your life. I give you grace and room and patience to change. Grace creates room for transformation. Now, sometimes there's a collateral, there's a flow-on effect in this life from some of the choices we've made before. Comrade Duke is in prison and will spend the rest of his life there. But Lapel goes and visits him. And he loves him like a brother, and he loves him for the man that he's become. And Comrade Duke is no longer Comrade Duke. He is Hang Pin, follower of Jesus, and he is bringing light into a very, very dark place. And how could your life be different if you allowed grace to work its way into every nook and cranny of your life? And you accept that God is quite happy not to give you what you deserve, but to give you what you need and give you room to be transformed and grow. And not only for you, but for you not just to be a reservoir of that, to be a conduit of grace to others and to see what lives you can touch and what lives you can change. And see if you can do it for Manasseh, if you can do it for Comrade Duke, then he most certainly can do it for you. Grace creates room for transformation.